Ken?
Yeah.
Perfect. I just emailed you.
For all those who are waiting, we got about 10 minutes to the next session, so hunker down and we'll get started shortly.
I really hope he's here. He said he was going to be here. Awesome. Because the way that we had it set up, so there's a few things that we can do. You can use this as the clicker. This is a lot of you can control your own session, or I can click for you.
You need to put it on this.
Yes.
That's what you want. Probably a video focus. You got to video not.
It just took it. Give it a second. Where did that flashlight go? Yeah, that's faster. WSJ, XPT, I can know that.
WSJ XPT.
Yep. There we go. Where are you from? Oh, yeah. That explains it. Yeah, welcome to Florida, where it's humid beginning in February.
Oh, God. I took my shower and then walked over here and I was like,
Drenched. I forget, Dodge Floridians at the beginning. Ooh, okay. Yeah, there's humidity and it's gonna make you sweat and uncomfortable. All right, so here's the wireless mic, or you can use the physical mic, whichever you prefer. Okay, so here, this is the actual mic part. I'd probably hook it somewhere closer to your lanyard, or maybe on the top of your shirt collar. I don't just need to make sure. Okay, that's recording. Audio's good. You have to turn on the pack. So it's like a Motorola phone, like the old school one. So the on button is right there. Turn that on. And so this means it's a kind of button that slide over. So it's on mute right now. You can unmute it. And then you can just do a test really fast if you want.
Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Can you guys all hear me? All right. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3.
So let me actually put that on this. You have a video?
Couple.
Play.
You'll just have to go to just open it. Go back in. That'll work.
Okay. It's sharing this specific screen. The entire screen, so that when they go to YouTube.
It's fine. If we're recording it or whatever. I have other recordings of this presentation too. We can use if we need to.
So, buttons left and right, and you're good to go.
All right. Thanks.
Do you need a water? If you need water, they're here.
I got it.
Okay. If you need more, they're here. I will get this presentation.
Good.
Set up. All right.
Okay, so we're ready to move along. We have our next great session here with Mr. Ken Weston. I'll go ahead and do a quick introduction, Mr. Weston. Ken Weston is a security strategist with Panther. Ken has been in the security field for over 15 years, working with companies to increase their security posture through threat hunting, insider threat programs, and vulnerability research. In the past, he has worked closely with law enforcement, helping to unveil organized crime groups. His work has been featured in Wired, Forbes, New York Times, Good Morning America, and others. And he is regularly reached out to as an expert in cybersecurity, cybercrime, and surveillance. With all that being said, without further ado, Mr. Ken Weston.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And thanks for having me. Yeah, hi, my name's Ken Weston. So we're going to be talking today about a concept that I actually kind of came about. I was asked to do a keynote speech for B-Sides Portland, where I'm from. I'm from actually from Oregon, so this is a bit of a long flight for me, and I feel like a vampire here because I'm melting. But that talk was around, like, they wanted me to say, how did you get into security? Like, they wanted me to talk to students, and I really thought about it, and I was like, I don't even know how the hell I got into this. Right? I just started, doing things around technology. I was really interested in it, and I feel like in a lot of ways the InfoSec community actually brought me into it. It chose me. So again, I've been an Oregon native. I grew up without the internet. Kind of give you an idea how old I am. We didn't have the internet. I grew up out in the country, out in the woods of Oregon. Spent more time doing cow tipping than I did actually on the computer. But I also had some learning disabilities. I'm dysgraphic. I can't write at all. And I had a lot of challenges in school around that. And I also had ADHD that came with that. And so I didn't do very well in school. And I actually grew up believing that I was stupid and lazy, because that's what people would tell me, teachers and things like that. So I'm still a little angry about it. But it wasn't until, like, I started actually getting to computers, once I was actually diagnosed, then I was given access to computers and word processors. And when I got access to computers, then I feel like I actually had a superpower. I was finally able to communicate. I'd always read tons of books. I remember we moved to this house and there was this huge library of books in the basement where my bedroom was. I ended up just reading. I loved reading. Teachers always would say, like, Ken just doesn't apply himself. I can ask him questions and he can tell me what he read, but when he writes it down, he just doesn't take the time. So when I got into more and more into computers, I really started realizing that it is superpower, and I started getting more into programming. I actually ended up going to college. I got my first degree in a BA in English literature, and then I went on later on and got a master's in internet systems development. And I've been in security for quite a while. I actually had a startup called Gadget Track, which I'm going to talk about some of the cases I worked on and how I kind of stumbled into that. And that's kind of what I kind of talk about, where rabbit holes is. I do sort of stumble into these things. Like, one thing leads to another. I really see that there's these sort of dots that get connected when you're doing an investigation or even in your career. And my hobbies are, I'm a guitar and record hoarder. I have quite a few guitars. I love playing guitar, playing a band. And I like records as well. Some of us still like to be offline. So what is it about rabbit holes? Like, what do I mean by this? But if anyone have ADHD, you don't have to raise your hand, but like a lot of us do. And in some cases, there is sort of a superpower too around being able to do hyperfocus. And so sometimes it's hard for us to keep track of certain things, but once we get our teeth into something we're really passionate about, whether it's like an investigation, if I'm tracking a criminal or something like that, I don't give up. Like, I remember there would be 2 or 3 days when I wouldn't sleep when I was coding stuff, when I was tracking people. And a lot of times people didn't think that some of this technology that I was building was even possible, right? So I think that's one thing, like, especially if you're a student, if someone tells you, especially someone in an authority figure tells you something isn't possible, now that's your life goal, is to make that possible. So why do I say also rabbit hole? Like, I feel like, if you guys like Alice in Wonderland, I like cybersecurity because we're all a little different. I think in order to be in cybersecurity, you have to think different. We're out here, we're breaking things. We're not only do we have to understand technology, we have to understand it to a point that we can actually break it and modify it, enhance it, make it more secure, right? That takes a very disciplined, different type of mindset, I think, than you'll even find in other technology. So in Alice in Wonderland, right, they say we're all mad down here, and I believe that's true. We all think a little bit differently. This is sort of one of my walls of shame. So these are criminals. Some of them are people that I've actually retrieved some of their devices for. Some of the faces are blurred out to protect the guilty. But I had technology where, we'll talk about some of this. I started with USB devices, then I started figuring out, okay, well, how can I track a laptop? And I was able to go in and actually look at a lot of the techniques that like cyber criminals were using, and I applied them for good, for the purpose of theft recovery. And the cool thing about that is a lot of cyber criminals, they can't patent that technology. I now have 2 patents. I did a talk at DEF CON around some of this, DEF CON 23. I ended up getting doxxed as a result of it when I was talking about all this stuff. Some of the media, they don't understand. When you start talking about this technology, they start thinking it's spyware, it's all malicious. But there were a lot of controls that I actually put in place that was very responsible how we approach some of this stuff. I think the meet the real life Mr. Robot, that's total hyperbole. A little kind of pissed me off. But when I'm doing investigations too, like, this is true for these types of investigations, or if you're doing any sort of cybersecurity investigation in your SIM, it's never just one alert. If you're just sitting there and you're looking at your SIM and you're just looking at your alerts and okay, that's false positive, let's just go wipe the system, right? That's not conducting an investigation. An alert like that is actually the first clue. And then it's your job to then go out and find additional clues, whether it's going into your Splunk instance or whatever you're using for your security data lake. And oftentimes, there's going to be a lot of evidence that you're going to be able to gather to tell the larger story of that particular incident. Anyone know who this is? Anyone heard this phrase? This is Edmond Lecard. So he is the sort of the grandfather of forensic science. He was in France. He was the French, they call him the French Sherlock Holmes. He actually developed a lot of concepts and principles that we use in forensics today. Some of the precursors, like even before, like fingerprinting and things like that. He's really a brilliant guy, and he had this concept, and he said every contact leaves a trace. And the idea there is that when someone commits a crime, not only do they take something with them, they leave something behind. So we think about that with physical crimes, right? There can be blood splatter. Sometimes he had some cases where there was like metal shavings in someone's pocket to identify like he was there at this location in some sort of a mining facility. Like there's all these sorts of little clues that if we know where to look for them, we can actually identify that. And what I believe is this actually carries over in the digital world as well, especially nowadays with all of the logging that we have available to us, all of this information that's available at our fingertips. Everything we do right now, we're being tracked. If you think about what's in your pocket, you think about the photos you post, and I'm going to talk to you guys about some of those examples throughout this talk. So I got started. I was a web developer. I ended up being a one-man web army for a company where my first exposure to security was actually managing a web server. And I had to protect it, secure it. It's a basic LAMP stack, as well as building the websites and things like that. The company that I was at, they had a new technology, a new product that was blocking USB flash drives from being plugged into networks. It was becoming an issue where, it's great, you can hack from outside, try to get into the network, but it's a hell of a lot easier when you're inside the network and you can just plug a flash drive in. You can do all sorts of fun, malicious things. Or you can also steal data. And so this technology would block it. And that's when I started getting really interested in this. I started actually looking at some of these different tools that were being utilized to steal data. And I started making my own to try to test our technology. And then I said, hey, I'm going to put this up on a website. I think people would really want to learn more about this, particularly like system administrators. They don't understand the threat. So I actually made a bunch of these tools available on a website called usbhacks.com. That's the first time the FBI contacted me. So the idea was I would build happy little spyware. I was actually working on my master's dissertation at the time. And so what I did was I took some of this technology. I'm like, I don't need to be too invasive. I can gather just enough information that if someone stole a flash drive or an external drive, if they plug it in, I could take over that system and gather some information for law enforcement. And I put it out there for free. And I think I put it on Dig for all you young guys. It used to be before Reddit. We had Dig. Yeah. And this website got dug to the ground. It was on shared host. I had 20,000 people that were signing up for it. It went crazy. The cool thing about that too, though, is I also had additional information to gather information about the devices that were being connected. So as I was gathering that information and people were using the tool, I had a whole list of all the devices that I could actually track. I had everything from external hard drives, GPS systems. Remember before you actually had it in your phone, your car, you had these devices that you would then plug in, and to update the maps, you had to connect it to a computer. Well, I could hijack your computer as a result of that. And I put this out there, and then I actually decided that I was going to do a startup around it. And we started actually getting some actual cases. I was just kind of curious if it would work. We had the first case, and the first thing that people have in their username, it was the name of the family of the kid that stole an iPod. And then we kind of expanded this. There was a professor that was using this, and he had his dissertation on a flash drive that was taken from his classroom. And we were getting some information. I kept getting IP address pings that were from AT&T. That's not really helpful from an ISP unless I have to go to law enforcement. Then I have to, have to do a bunch of paperwork. It's a huge pain in the ass to get information on the IP, and then of course it changes. It could have been a Starbucks, you don't know. But we started getting additional connections from the university. And we looked at the timestamp for it, and I was able to see that work with the campus security. And we identified that it was coming from a specific computer lab. And in that computer lab, they had actually had a bunch of laptops that were stolen the year prior. So they had the key card, and they also had cameras that were available for us. So I also had the students who was in there. There was 3 or 4 students that were in there. And from that, they were able to identify the student that had it. They waited for him outside of a classroom, and he got his flash drive back. That was one of my first cases. And so some of the word about this got out, and there was a company called FLIR. A lot of people in the military probably know FLIR. Yeah. So FLIR makes these really expensive thermal imaging cameras. They're anywhere from like $3,000 to $300,000. And so they came to me, and they're like, "Is there a way that you could, put your theft tracking on us? Not only for tracking thefts, they're also having issues with export controls. Some of these cameras can't go to certain countries because of the embargoes, or because of like being used for nuclear purposes and things like that." So one of the tricks, though, was that the storage is on an SD card. And if someone pulls an SD card out and they put a new one in, my little Trojan executable won't run. So what I did was we worked with them, and we actually installed something in the firmware that would actually reinstall the agent if it wasn't on there. And that's my cat. I actually disguised the executable as an image, and that's my cat Nobby. And then we actually ended up getting some tracking. They couldn't tell me some of the that was stolen, but they did tell me it helped considerably with some of the export control issues that they were having. I believe they identified a distributor that was selling these cameras to places they shouldn't. So again, further down the rabbit hole, I didn't want to stop there. I was like, well, these flash drives are all great, but what people really care about was their laptops. And at that time, most laptops started having web cameras. It's hard to believe. Like that's how old I am, right? I was alive when web cameras weren't installed on laptops. So you also at the time, the first iPhone had come out, and I was really interested. Like, how did this iPhone not have a GPS chip and it was doing tracking? And then they was using Wi-Fi positioning, and then they were using this company called Skyhook to do it. So I reached out to them, and I told them about my idea, and I got a special license from them to use it on Mac, and I helped them debug a lot of this stuff. So the idea is that if someone steals your laptop, activate tracking, we'll take a photo of the person that's using your computer, we'll get the location, and then we'll also get other network information that can be helpful for law enforcement. This was a game changer for law enforcement because at that time, they were dealing primarily with a company called Absolute Software that was doing this, but that required a backdoor into the system. You had to give that company, even though they were a bunch of like retired law enforcement folks, back-end access to your system. Whereas I wanted to make this much more self-sufficient, so you don't have to give that access up. So I didn't want to have to set up a server. I didn't want to have to secure it, particularly given the nature of this, the technology at the time, and it was just me. So we made it so we actually integrated with a photo sharing website called Flickr. So what we would do is you would create an account on Flickr, and then I would use their API, and that's where we'd upload the images and other information. And I ended up getting our first recovery, and it was in New York. A customer had his laptop stolen along with a bunch of camera equipment, and we traced it to this one. It looked like it was in a tattoo parlor. We had the photo, we had the general location, and I had to deal with a police officer there who was a total asshole. He was like, "Oh God, I hate dealing with this technology. I got to go do a bunch of paperwork." And I'm like, "Yeah, sorry, you have to do your job." And I was like, "But you don't have to do that. It's not like the other technology where you have to go get the ISP and all that. I'm saying this is general location." He goes, "Oh, I've seen this before. Like it's just in the city. I can't look around the whole city." I'm like, "No, It's within 10 to 20 meters. And his eyes kind of lit up and he was like, okay. And he goes, well, still a lot of work. And I go, I have a photo. Just take the photo, look around that area, ask if anyone knows him. And he finally did. And they ended up finding there was this guy who owns a tattoo shop, parlor. And then in the back, he has, if you see in the background, there's keyboards, there's mixers, there's all kinds of really cool stuff. So he was basically running a fencing operation. And they actually went in there finally. They recovered like 4 other laptops, all sorts of other camera equipment and everything like that as well. And then the cop in that case, he wanted to be my friend and he wanted to go to a baseball game next time in New York. So pretty cool. And then I started getting more into this. One thing I really started discovering was, we would find these sort of larger fencing operations. A lot of this was organized crime. In Portland, Oregon, there's a few Russian organized crime groups, not necessarily, the Russian community doesn't like them very much. These are people that were criminals. They were, when the Soviet Union fell, they kind of pushed them all into all of these other states, and then they removed their passports, so they couldn't come back. And then a lot of them ended up actually in Portland. There's a whole kind of group of them. But they would go in, and we found that they were stealing a bunch of laptops from schools. And then they would replace the laptops. A week later, they would come back in and steal them again. And so this kept happening. So I said, let's set out some bait laptops. So we installed our software on some laptops, didn't even lock them up in the cupboard. Sure enough, within a couple of weeks, they were stolen. And we started getting the location from them and some photos. This one was a little tricky. The police detective, he went to the address. Again, I tell him it's 10 to 20 meters. It's not 100% precise. You have to do some detective work. Goes to the address that was listed on there, and a guy answers the door, and it's the guy that does his roof. So he's telling me, you don't know what the hell you're doing. Like, you're wasting the police officer's time. You can go to jail for this, and just being a total douchebag about it. I got pissed off. Again, down the rabbit hole. I don't like no. So I drove out there. And I had my alpha antenna. I was sniffing the Wi-Fi network, so I was trying to verify that it was correct. And I swear, I'm parked, and I look across the street. The Wi-Fi network that we were connected to, it said Russian Pride. And I look over, and right next to the other, the house that they went to was a duplex. There was a car, and there was a big Russia bumper sticker on it. And then I'm sitting there sniffing the Wi-Fi, and a guy walks out. And he's going to wash his car, and he's staring at me. And I'm looking like an idiot, like I'm just looking for directions, right? So I told the detectives. They came out there finally with like 3 or 4 of them. And then they're saying, oh, yeah, we did some more research on these guys. And, that guy's not so bad. But the other guy across the street, he's bad news. Like, oh, thanks, guys. They ended up busting them. There was like 6 or 7 people that were involved in this. They even, I think they even got recovered a stolen car as a part of this case as well. I thought I was going to have to go testify. I actually started getting a little scared because they were talking about how these guys were bad news. But they were able to do it so that I was listed as an anonymous informant. And then they got them all to rat each other out. So I didn't have to go to court. Had another one. This one was interesting. Another Russian organized crime group. This one was a little weird because it was like several weeks after it was stolen and I wasn't getting any pings. I was like, great. They reformatted the hard drive or sold it for parts. And then I started actually getting a connection from like Missouri, like of all places. And the nice thing about this one is that the guy changed the username on the computer to his full name. It was great. And so I had his name, and I started doing more research on him. And like I had tons of photos with him, like he was in a hotel, like all kinds of stuff that he was doing that was pretty nefarious. And so on this one, I ended up gathering a lot more information because, again, people didn't understand the technology, but I had his name. So I started researching a lot of forums. I found that he really likes Scion cars, so he was in these forums, posting photos of his car. So I had his license plate number. He was also a power seller on eBay, and on eBay he was selling all sorts of car parts and things like that. So you can kind of get an idea what kind of business he was in. And so the DA that said, this is great technology, and it was the first time we had like sort of case law where they go, even if they don't have the laptop, with all the information you provided to us, we can still bust him for having stolen property. He ended up selling the laptop as well as a stolen bike to his friend Omar, so that was there. And what happened is that this was a gift from his father for his birthday. his father was involved in this operation where they would take trucks of stolen goods and they would drive it from Portland to Missouri, pick up stolen property there, and then drive it to Portland. So they were sort of collaborating, and that's how they kind of get around that. If you get a laptop stolen, first place you're going to look is your local Craigslist, and they were smart to that. So they knew that they would ship them around. Ended up working this internationally as well. There was a guy, he was a veterinary student. He was with his friend in a car. They got carjacked, and his friend got beat to crap. And they had the laptop in the back, and then we were able to track this one down. And apparently, the police there, and it was Apollo, they really liked this because they actually did this to like several people. There was 10 different cases that they were involved in with this, and then this helped lead them to identify who was doing these crimes. So then further down the rabbit hole, like laptops aren't enough, let's go into mobile, right? And this was really interesting, trying to build applications for both iOS as well as for Android. So I didn't want to just track it because no one really cares about their phone if it gets stolen, just get a new one, right? What they do care about is the data. And so that's what I started working on was, what if we can encrypt the data, upload it to the cloud in such a way that I don't even have access to it? And that's what we started building. And that's when there was a chain of Sprint stores that actually deployed our technology to some of their, all of their test units or the demo units. I'm sure the videos are going to work here. Yeah, it's not. Anyway, I'll kind of walk you through the story. That was trippy. If it had a beat, would have been good. Well, I worked. I had customers everywhere. Like they're all over the place.
He's live outside the Washington Square Mall where the theft took place.
Well, the managers of the Sprint store here at the Washington Square Mall behind me say they're very confident that tracking software developed only miles away from here and put onto their demo phones will lead to an arrest.
This is a $500 phone. This ended up being a $450 phone.
2 empty display cradles are all that remains after someone stole 2 demo cell phones from the Sprint store at Washington Square Mall on Saturday. Moments after surveillance video caught the theft on tape, employees initiated tracking software installed on the stolen phones.
We were able to not only find the GPS location of the individuals that took them, but also we've been able to monitor any activity that happens in the phone.
That activity turned out to be pictures someone took shortly after the phones were stolen. Tiger police admit it's a brave new world when pictures taken on cell phones can be told to send back pictures once they're stolen.
And that has not only taken the interest of our investigators, but in essence appears at this point to be very credible information for us to follow up on.
The creator of the software tracking that says police are on the right track.
If they're not the thieves, I definitely know.
If you look over the head of this man, you'll see in the window an important temporary permit. So this is Ed. With the help of a gadget track investigator on the phone, we tracked the stolen phone signal to this Vancouver apartment complex. There we found the exact temporary permit and a young woman who told us off camera a man she called Peter had sent this photo to her Saturday evening, but says she knew nothing about the phones. I managed to track the second cell phone signal to this duplex about 8 blocks away.
You don't have a Samsung Epic phone in this location?
Police were here yesterday looking for it.
We're back live now inside the Washington Square Mall where we've just obtained within the hour the DMV records on that temporary permit.
Next slide. your patience with that. So, you know, when I did that, the one thing with the software is that people own the device and they install the software on their own device. And I think that ethically that's okay. Some of the challenges lately, I think, around some of the commercial mobile spyware, you guys have probably heard of Pegasus, that was actually being sold to governments, and it was being used not against criminals, but also against dissidents, journalists, and other folks who are innocent of crimes. And so I've been kind of heavily involved with helping a lot of people with particularly disinformation around this. There's a lot of some of the countries that were involved with this. They're trying to, you know, throw some of the companies that were, sorry, some of the NGOs that have been doing it and unveiling some of this research, like Amnesty and Citizen Lab, under the bus. And this stuff really kind of frustrates me. And I don't think that we as a society want this kind of technology. And I do believe that we do need to have some controls around it. So one thing with this is that when we were doing this investigation, some challenges I had, some of these devices were, their GPS was really crappy and I wasn't getting very accurate results. But what I was getting from it was the EXIF data, the GPS coordinates that were embedded in those images became incredibly helpful. And so this is, again, further down the rabbit hole. I started digging more into the images and how EXIF data can be utilized for conducting these types of investigations as well. Of course, you know, you also have the trip permit. That's just, I don't know, sometimes you just get lucky, right? A lot of times you'll find that criminals can be pretty stupid. A lot of times what leads them to get caught that I found is arrogance and greed. Those are the two things that usually end up getting them caught. In this case, they actually, again, it was an organized crime group that they'd actually recovered a stolen car in this one too. And there were 6 people that were actually involved in this. And these were the younger kids that were kind of the ones that are kind of going out there and stealing phones. And then they had another group that was fencing them. So I was curious about EXIF data. One of the challenges I'd had though was that there wasn't really a search engine for EXIF data. If I put in, you know, the serial number or something like that, or make and model of a camera, there's no way for you to search it. But what I did find was that a lot of the higher end cameras actually were embedding the make, model, and serial number of the camera in the images. Now, wouldn't it be great if I could actually search that? So I had a friend that had a startup. Basically, they were doing we created a legal botnet. Basically, you know, SETI at home, that kind of approach, like where you have, you know, distributed computing. They actually had a service where they were, you know, doing that where, you know, as a customer, I could go, hey, I got this work I need to get done. And then they'd have like thousands of computers where I could get access to their idle computer time to be able to run this. Because I was trying to do this, like trying to Flickr with just a few systems. I even tried with AWS, and it would have taken forever. There was like over 4 billion images for me to go through. With this approach, we had access to about 1,000 computers, and then I just had Python scripts that they were all hoarding, and they're all gathering all this information from Flickr. And then I created a database with it. I also found a bunch of other websites, like there was a bunch of other photo sharing websites, and Twitter too. Like even though Twitter made it so that when you upload a photo, it actually removes all the EXIF data, I was found that a lot of profile photos still had EXIF data embedded in it. Not just like the make and model, but also like people's GPS coordinates and things like that. Luckily, hopefully they fixed that. Who knows? But basically, the idea here was that I wanted to create a database of all these images so that you could have a search for your serial number of your camera, and we'll identify all of the photos that were taken with that camera that we found on the internet, and it worked. This is one of those things where, you know, F around and find out. I was just curious if it worked. I put it out there for free. It ended up getting in some news websites. And this guy, John Heller, he is a professional photographer. He was on assignment for Getty Images. And he ended up having his, I found, it's just like a year later. And he did a search and he found it. And we saw that it went to Flickr. And then he was able to find that user had an account on Facebook. And on Facebook, the guy had a photo of all of his photography equipment. And he goes, holy shit, that's my camera. In this one, the LAPD was involved. And sort of what happened was the guy stole it. It was like, I think it was like $7,000 in camera gear. He'd sold it on Craigslist. Then that person sold it on eBay. And the police went and found the guy that had it. And he said, no, I got it from this guy on Craigslist. And this is like a year later. And they go, do you still have the address? And he goes, yeah. Gave him the address. The police go to this apartment. And sure enough, they find all sorts of stolen property. Again, so I just think this was cool because it's like one little piece of information, a serial number that's embedded inside of a photo that someone uploaded, led to this type of crime being unveiled. And so this is what I get excited about and I think there's a lot of this kind of thing that we can think about, not just in these types of investigations in the physical world, but a lot more in the digital world. And I had another one. This guy, I was on Craigslist again. I swear I'm going to start calling it theft list. And this guy, he was going to move to California. He was selling a bunch of stuff, and this guy shows up, even shows him cash, goes out to the garage, shows him this camera that he was going to sell. The guy just punches him, knocks him to the ground, gets the camera, jumps in the car, and takes off. And then this one was where I had to use a little more OSINT skills. I was able to find this guy's account. I was able to then also look at all of the EXIF data that he had in his photos, and he was changing cameras like every month. And he advertised himself as a DJ and a professional photographer for models. And so also on his Flickr, he was uploading on some of the other accounts that he thought were anonymous. He was uploading photos of himself smoking weed, nothing wrong with that. But maybe don't take photos of yourself smoking weed, going 100 miles an hour down the freeway when you have GPS coordinates that are actually embedded in that image. This one, the police did not help at all. I had all this information and everything, but they just couldn't be bothered. But still kind of cool that we got it. He also had some unregistered firearms. This technology ended up, I was approached by the ICE SI Center. These people are doing really cool stuff with identifying exploited children. You probably heard about some of the work that they've done, like where they'll actually get images of like curtains and bedspreads in hotel rooms to identify, like if a guy takes a photo of a kid, innocent image, then they can try to figure out what hotel or whatever that they're at before something bad happens to that kid. And so I gave them free access to the API, so they had full access to the data. The idea here is that if Joe Pervert is doing this nasty thing and then he goes on vacation with his family to Disneyland, he takes photos and posts them on Flickr, then they might be able to identify someone that's doing this. They couldn't tell me if it was actually useful, if they caught anyone or anything like that, of course, just given the nature of the cases. But I thought this was a really cool application of it. So kind of thinking about all this too is like, there's all these techniques that people can use to track you, and it's not always good people, right? Like we're not always trying to track criminals. The same techniques can be used to track us. Criminals can use it against us. And so I always kind of think about this, what we've done is this sort of quantified self-pawn, where, think about all the different pieces of data that you actually have on your phone, every single device, your vehicles, everything. It's all available and it's searchable. And if I can get access to it, right, then I can do some pretty nasty things. What's funny though is that a lot of us as consumers have lost access to this information. Like when EXIF data, Twitter, all the social media websites, they'll strip that information out. But do you think they throw it away? No. They have access to that data. They use that data. They will sell that data. And I have found that people always talk about doxing and things like that. I don't even consider that hacking anymore because all it takes is a credit card. I get a credit card, I can get all the information I need about an individual, right? So so people always say like, oh, you're doing really nasty things here. What if people abuse this? People already are, and you're paying them money for it. Another video, I'll skip this one. This one, after DEF CON, we got asked to, I got approached by a TV channel, and they wanted me to do this. A friend, we actually hacked a smart home. You can see it if you do a search for it. It's a Crime Watch Daily. Do a Crime Watch Daily smart home, you'll find it. And we were able to actually get into this house. We had 24 hours to get into it and do all sorts of nasty things. We used the cloud cracking service to crack the Wi-Fi password, and it was like $200. We could have saved money by doing a little bit of research because the password was the guy's cell phone number that he had posted on his real estate website. Once we got in, I was able to get access to the surveillance cameras. I had access to that. I also piped a bunch of audio in. We did like scary Mr. Robot voice saying we hacked the house. Because what they did after that was they had this big party. A bunch of people came in, and then we started messing with them. It was a lot of fun. We were opening the curtains and stuff like that. I was even able to flush the toilet because it had a cleaning mechanism in it. And for that, what we were able to do is that all of all the smart devices in the home, all had the default passwords. Right? So they didn't actually go through and change it. So we had a Wi-Fi pineapple. We were doing some research, just finding what the default passwords were. It was probably one of the easiest hacks I've ever done. But if you think about this too, like all the data that we actually have out there, I kind of call this, you guys are probably familiar with the hierarchy of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So this is kind of what I kind of think about how our data is being used. So there's at the very top, there's the data we create. And as we go down this pyramid, we lose control of that data, right? We believe that when we have data on our laptop, I can delete it. However, if I upload it to the cloud and I delete it, is it really gone? Right? No. So that's where we have data that's created for us. So maybe when we book airline tickets and things like that, there's all this information. Sometimes you can go and you can ask them to delete it, but did they already sell this? Are there archives of the data? Right? And then there's data that gets created about us as a result of this, where it's actually drawing those connections. Kind of what I was talking about with the quantified self, right? We're going through and they're actually making those connections and building these rich profiles of individuals. And then there's shadow data, and that's where you're actually getting into going into like the dark websites and a lot of the data breaches that have occurred. There's a lot of information about us that's available that, it's kind of scary to think about what's actually out there. Another project thing I did, I was working with another case, and I ended up stumbling on this kind of mail server issue where all of a sudden I saw that there was this Prodigy server, and I was able to access all of these emails. And then I worked with El Economista in Mexico about this. When it was Telmex acquired the Prodigy, they made a misconfiguration to the server, and basically all of their email accounts were now being indexed by Google, and I could access pretty much all of them. We did responsible disclosure and all that to Google as well as to them. But one of the challenges with this one was Carlos Slim. We were getting a bunch of media attention, and there was going to be a big news article about this. He put the kibosh on it. He was able to shut that down because he was that powerful, right? So a lot of people didn't even know about this or even know that their emails were potentially compromised. Another one I got really interested in was kind of tracking black hats on white collars. In a lot of these forums, I got interested in a lot of the credit card carding things that were happening. And I found that there were these forums where they were actually looking for insider information for trades. You started seeing cryptocurrency come out. And a lot of people that were interested in finance on the white collar side, traders and things like that, became very interested in cryptocurrency. And they started actually colluding with cyber criminals to gather information around, it could be like a patent that's going to be released, earnings reports, things like that. Information that if you're an insider in the company, it's illegal for you to trade on that information. And I started looking more into this, and I saw that there was just tons of money that was being made off of this. There was probably, there was one case I even researched, this Dubovay group, and they made like $30 million. And one of the ringleaders of it, he was actually a former VP at Morgan Stanley. And then he now was a church pastor. And he had all this money. He even had a bunch of his people in his church that were trying to raise money for his legal defense. He was found guilty. And then just recently, there was another case like this with the GRU officers that were found that were doing this as well. And they were making like over $80 million doing these sorts of illicit trades. So some of the work I'm currently doing, purple teaming in Detectives Code. I just recently started at Panther. We did a workshop yesterday. I think some people here attended it. It was fun. I've been working a lot with fighting the commercial spyware, especially disinformation around that's been coming out. I like exposing InfoSec charlatans in particular. And then I've also been refurbishing guitars. That's kind of my plan for retirement. I want to get off of cyber at some point and just work on guitars. With that being said, I want to thank you guys all for having me. And if you want to reach out to me, have any questions, my contact information is here. Don't dox me, just reach out. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the help on that. That was awesome. Came in with the assist.
That was awesome. I love that. That was great. That was awesome. Yeah,